I've always been the type of guy who trusts logic over superstition. I'm in my early 40s. I work in finance, and I'm too busy with spreadsheets and deadlines to entertain the idea of ghosts or anything supernatural. So, when my company booked me an Airbnb for a week-long work trip to a small rural town, I thought nothing of it. It was just a place to crash after long days of meetings. Nothing more. The listing seemed perfect. The house was described as a charming Victorian-style farmhouse, tucked away from the noise of the city. The pictures showed high ceilings, large windows, a cozy fireplace, and a wide wraparound porch. The reviews were glowing, with only the occasional mention of creaks or unexpected quirks from the old house. I shrugged it off. People were always looking for something to complain about. I arrived in the late afternoon, under a sky that threatened rain. The air felt unusually heavy, like the whole atmosphere was holding its breath. The host, Ellen, greeted me with a quick handshake and an oddly tight smile. She looked tired, a bit worn down, but she was polite and welcoming. "You'll be comfortable here," she said, motioning toward the front door. "It's an old house, but it has character. Don't mind the odd sounds, it's just settling." I nodded, trying to shake off the weird vibes. The house smelled of wood and something faintly musty, but nothing too unpleasant. Inside, the living room was exactly as advertised. Large, dark wooden beams crisscrossed the ceiling, and a fire was already burning in the stone hearth, filling the room with warmth. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The house didn't feel alive, like it was waiting for something. Ellen showed me around, pointing out the bedrooms, the kitchen, and the large study that seemed untouched by time. The furniture looked like it had been passed down through generations, worn but sturdy. When she finished the tour, she paused for a moment in the hallway, looking at me with an intensity I hadn't expected. "There's one thing you should know," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The house is particular. Some guests report feeling things, hearing things, but nothing to worry about. Just an old place, that's all." Her eyes darted quickly to the hallway mirror before snapping back to mine. The expression on her face was one of quiet dread, but she immediately masked it with another forced smile. "You'll be fine." I didn't think much of it at the time. I'm not one to buy into superstitions, after all. So I thanked her, and she left, driving off into the distance as I unloaded my things. The first night was uneventful. I set up my laptop and worked for a few hours before hitting the sack. The bed was firm but comfortable, the sheets crisp and cool. I tried to sleep, but the house was unnervingly still. Every few minutes, I'd hear a soft creak from the floorboards, or a faint tapping sound from above. I chalked it up to the house settling, just as Ellen had warned. But as the night wore on, the sounds became harder to ignore, louder, sharper. At around 2 a.m., I woke to a cold draft sweeping across the room. I pulled the blanket tighter round me, groggy from the interrupted sleep. The air felt unnaturally cold, like the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in an instant. I was about to close my eyes and drift back to sleep when I heard it. Soft whispers, so faint that I thought I was imagining them at first. Leave now. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The whisper came from somewhere down the hallway, and it sounded like someone was standing just outside my door, breathing heavily. Get out. I held my breath, staring at the door. There was no way I was hearing things. It was real. I got out of bed and crept toward the door, but when I opened it, the hallway was empty. The whispering stopped immediately. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The result of being in an unfamiliar place, a long day of travel, and too much stress. But the feeling of unease lingered in the pit of my stomach, and I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone in that house. The next day, I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling and went to work. But when I returned in the evening, things started to get strange. The first thing I noticed was the mirror. It was an antique piece, framed in tarnished gold, hanging in the hallway right next to the stairs. I had passed it several times already, but now it seemed different. The reflection in the mirror didn't look quite right. I could see myself, sure, but something was off. My face seemed too pale, my eyes too dark. I shrugged it off as just fatigue or poor lighting. But then, as I walked past the mirror, I could have sworn I saw a movement in the reflection, not from me, but something behind me. I spun around quickly, heart racing, but there was no one there. I froze in place, staring at the empty hallway. And then, for the briefest of moments, I saw something in the reflection. A figure standing at the top of the stairs, just out of the corner of my eye. I turned, but the hallway was empty. It was then that I knew something was terribly wrong. That night, the whispering grew louder. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, listening as the words turned clearer. Leave before it's too late. I got up and checked the doors, the windows, anything that might explain the noises. But everything was locked, and the house seemed as still as ever. Something wasn't right. The air felt heavy, thick with an unnatural tension. At around 3 a.m., I heard a noise coming from upstairs. Soft footsteps dragging across the floor. Slowly, I got out of bed and grabbed my phone, using its flashlight to guide me through the dark house. I crept up the stairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, just out of sight. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw the hallway stretch out in front of me, lit only by the weak light from my phone. And that's when I saw her. She was standing at the far end of the hall, her back to me, staring at a door that was slightly ajar. Her hair was long, dark and wild, hanging in matted tangles around her face. Her clothes were ragged, torn in places, as though they had been worn for years. But what chilled me to the bone was her eyes wide, glassy, staring directly at me, even though her face was turned away. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice a guttural rasp that echoed in the empty hallway. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the floor as she slowly turned to face me. Her face was pale, almost sickly, her lips pulled into a twisted, unnatural grin. "Leave now," she croaked, I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I ran out the front door, barefoot into the night, not caring about the rain that started to fall, or the fact that I had no idea where I was going. I just had to get out of there. At some point, I stopped running, still clutching my phone, breathless, shaking, and drenched to the bone. With my mind still reeling, I booked an Uber and was dropped off at a motel a few miles away. Sometime late the next afternoon, I asked a colleague to accompany me to quickly gather my belongings. Later, when the host asked what happened, I didn't tell her the truth. Not all of it. I just said I had a bad experience with the place. That it wasn't what I expected. She didn't ask for more details, and I was thankful for that. Although I didn't want anyone else to experience what I did, I found myself unable to leave a review. Still, there are times when I'm alone at night. I can still hear the whispers echoing the words, "Leave now."